Okay, this is podcast number 1, the Iranian Connection to what's called the end of times, or the end of days. God's plan for a time in the future, which is coming soon, where the end of days is going to happen. So the very first connection that we want to talk about is the Iranian Connection. Let's first look at this Iranian connection toward God's plan for the end of days. Okay, we have to first then look at the connection that President Trump has with Iran and why he is definitely part of God's plan for these end of days, or the last days. Now, God places kings, presidents, even dictators into his plan for bringing a climax known as these end of days. It's prophetic. It's in the Bible. It's in the news too. And the three key players in this end time scenario are President Donald Trump, the photos are up there now, the Iranian officials like former President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, which I'll get to in just a minute, and current President Hassan Rouhani. Israel's leader, that you can see up on the screen, is Benjamin Netanyahu. He is the Prime Minister of Israel. Now, Daniel 2:21 says this: God controls the course of world events. He removes kings and sets up other kings, or dictators, ayatollahs, presidents, queens, and so forth. So here is the first Iranian connection fired off from President Trump. I'll put that up on the screen now, and I will read it to you. It says, the picture there, Trump withdraws from the Iranian nuclear deal on May 8th of 2018. Washington, CNN. President Donald Trump announced Tuesday he's quitting the Iran nuclear deal, pitting him against the United States' closest allies and leaving the future of Tehran, that's the capital of Iran, of their nuclear ambitions in question. It is clear to me, Trump said, that we cannot prevent an Iranian nuclear bomb under the decaying and rotten structure of the current agreement. Trump also said from the White House diplomatic room that the Iran deal is defective at its core. If we do nothing, we know exactly what will happen, meaning Iran's going to go for the nukes. In announcing his long telegraphed decision, Trump said that he would initiate new sanctions on the regime, crippling the touchstone agreement negotiated by his predecessor, which of course was Barack Obama. Trump said any country that helps Iran obtain nuclear weapons would also be strongly sanctioned. Now, former President Barack Hussein Obama, who rarely comments on his successor, unless it's in his best interest, of course, issued a statement describing Trump's move as a serious mistake that could leave us, the United States, with a losing choice between a nuclear-armed Iran or another war in the Middle East. So, what do we do? From here, the supreme leader of Iran, the Ayatollah, is one who has amassed many followers and becomes an expert in religious, ethical, philosophical, and legal matters. An Ayatollah is only in what's called the Shiite faction of Islam. The other faction is called Sunnis. So Shiites and Sunnis. Sunni leadership are called the Grand Mufti, that is the spiritual leadership. Shiites and Sunnis split off in 632 AD when the Prophet Muhammad died, and a debate, should I say a fight really, started over who should be Muhammad's successor. Shiites and Sunnis agree that Allah is the one true God of Islam, and they both agreed that Muhammad was Allah's messenger. But the Shiites felt that Muhammad's successor should be someone in his bloodline, while the Sunnis figured that a pious person, any pious person, who would follow Muhammad's customs and writings should represent them. Iranians are Shia Muslims. Although Shia and Sunni Muslims live in the same area, they fight and sometimes kill one another over this religious divide. The Sunni population in Islam is the predominant population. Iran was and is very upset at the great Satan, which is America, for canceling the Iranian nuclear deal, because they were given billions of dollars by President Obama and multiple millions of dollars by other countries who signed on to that agreement. Now, Trump canceled the deal because he knows what Iran is up to regarding getting cash for nuclear bomb making. So he puts tough sanctions on Iran. This caused Iran to have terrible problems, and I'll tell you what we're talking about. I'll read that to you. I'll put it up here on the board right now. Headline: Donald Trump and the strangling of Persia. Well, whoever the writer of this article was, Persia is Iran, just so you know. Donald Trump and the strangling of Persia. Do you get the connection now between Trump, Iran, the end times, and Israel? It's all coming together. But let me continue to read. It says here, headline, subheadline, Washington should be made aware that anti-imperialism has deep roots in Iranian political culture. The picture shows them burning an effigy or face mask of Donald Trump. Now, that you've seen that, we'll move on. The supreme leader of Iran, that's the spiritual leader, has this to say about Israel. I'm going to post that up there now, and I'm going to read that also to you. Iran's supreme leader says Israel will not exist in 25 years. The supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, says this, and the subheadline of that says, the comments came after Ayatollah Ali Khamenei called on Muslims, that's all Muslims, to resist and fight, that's what they call jihad, to gain control of Jerusalem. Where's that? Israel. Let me read that again. The comments came after the Ayatollah called on Muslims to cause jihad in the world to gain control of Jerusalem, which is claimed as a capital by both Israelis and Palestinians. So, with that in mind, when the spiritual leader in Iran says that Israel will not exist in 25 years, he's likely really telegraphing that they won't exist as soon as their first and second nuclear bombs are ready to launch at Israel. Now, the Iranian president back in 2005 was a short guy by the name of Mahmoud, or Mahmoud as they say, Ahmadinejad. He had lots to say about how Iran wanted to wipe Israel from the face of the earth. But let's discover that Iran really wants to rule the world and calls for the same thing that progressives in the United States and across the world are calling for, and that is for a new world order or a new world system. Now, let's listen in on Ahmadinejad's conversation revealing that Islam wants to control the world in a new world order.
We seek to establish a new system, a new world system.
Lately, in 2019, because of the Trump sanctions on Iran, they are getting more and more hostile in the region. And we'll show you what we're talking about. I'm going to post this photo and I'm going to read it. This photo says, Iranian news, by the way, says Iran warns Israel against aiding U.S. mission in the Strait of Hormuz. And they, as you know, they're bombing, putting big holes in oil tankers in the Strait of Hormuz right now. That's why I say news, Iran, Israel, Trump, it all comes together in God's plan to finally bring an end to all of this chaos that the world is, that he predicted would happen. in his Bible 2,000 or more years ago, even 4,000 years ago by the prophet Daniel. So, Iran has said, by the way, that sanctions are leaving them with 2 nuclear options. The first is an option that they won't do. Let me put that on the screen for you right now. And that is, here it is. Iran has 2 nuclear options. The Islamic Republic can either go the Israeli way or the Egyptian way. So what that means is way 1 is to give up building nuclear bombs. They're not going to do that, believe me. And the second way is also, which they put it, is to do what Israel has done, the Israeli way, meaning to steal and to buy nuclear technology. So in either scenario, Iran clearly plans to use a nuclear device or 2 to wipe Israel off the map. I will point out that they will not wipe out Mount Zion or Jerusalem. They just won't do it because that's where their holy temple and the Al-Aqsa Mosque are. I'll get into that in just a moment. And just so you know that I don't make this stuff up, let me also post this news. And this photo will show a news clip. What it says is this: Iran threatens to reduce nuclear deal commitments further. What they're saying is, as of the moment that Trump said that we're not going to honor the Iranian nuclear deal anymore for obvious reasons, Iran then says, all right, then we're not going to commit to the deal that we signed on paper, which they never intended to do in the first place. Trump knows it. I think you really realize it because you can't trust these people in Iran whatsoever. So the Trump sanctions against Iran have really prompted them to say that they are speeding up their nuclear proliferation. But again, we all know that they're doing all of this with or without the so-called nuclear Iran deal that Obama, by the way, paid the billions of US dollars to get, which only funded Iran's quest for nuclear capabilities. Now, this next news article, I'm going to read that to you as well. It says, it's from a former Iranian president, who's still in power, by the way, different capacity, but Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. He says this, and you're reading it with me: obedience to God is the only way toward real progress. Now, what does he mean by that? Former President Ahmadinejad is a devout Islamic fundamentalist. He says obedience to God, meaning his God, which is Allah, is the only way to real progress. Now, let me read to you his words about how he believes that the Islamic Quran is the divine book. And it calls for all people, meaning Muslims, but all people of the world too, to worship only Allah. I'm going to put another piece of news up here. And Ahmadinejad's words say, there's his lovely photo with his flag behind him, a Muslim flag. The Holy Quran is the divine book and the eternal miracle of the Prophet of Islam, which in his case is the Prophet Muhammad. He's a Shiite, and I'll get into that in just a minute too. But the Holy Quran, calls for worshiping one God. You see what I'm saying? I don't make this stuff up. One God, one justice, one compassion toward people, development and progress, reflection and thinking, defending the oppressed and resisting against the oppressors. That's us and Israel. And it names with respect the previous message of God, like Noah, Abraham. All of these people are biblical people that are also in the Iranian culture, as well as the Jewish and Christian culture. So he names them off. The previous messengers of God were, and he's talking about prophets, Noah, Abraham, Isaac, Joseph, Moses, and Jesus Christ. Peace be upon them all, and he endorses them. Now, Ahmadinejad also believes that Islam will control the population of the world one day. That is the goal of Islam. And that day is when their Messiah comes. Just like the Christians have a Messiah and predict his coming back to claim his followers and saints, and just like the Jews are waiting for a Messiah, Islam has a expectation of a Messiah. The Islamic Messiah is called Al-Mahdi, which you will hear Ahmadinejad proclaim is coming to Iran and to him personally in this next clip. And he believes that he is the chosen one. He, Ahmadinejad, is the chosen one to receive Al-Mahdi, or what they call the 12th Imam, the Messiah. Watch this clip.
The belief in the one God has been replaced with self-belief. Some have taken the place of God and insist to impose their values and wishes on others. Messengers were sent by God to show the light of the truth to mankind. They came to make people aware of their individual and social obligations. Piety, having faith in Allah and its judgment of human behavior in the next world, belief in the primacy of justice in both lives, mankind should excel to represent God's knowledge and wisdom, his compassion and benevolence, his justice and fairness, his power and art, and his kindness and forgiveness. These will all come true under the rule of the perfect man, the last divine source on earth, Hazrat Mahdi, peace be upon him.
To give you a little more insight, let's listen in on an interview with Ahmadinejad concerning this Al-Mahdi, or 12th Imam, or Messiah, the coming. Just so you don't think, as I said, I make this stuff up. I don't. Here's the interview right here.
In your speeches, you pray for God to hasten the arrival of the hidden Imam, the Muslim Messiah. Would you tell us, as I know you will speak about this at the General Assembly as well, what is your relationship with the hidden Imam, and how soon do you think before the second coming?
Yes, that's true. I prayed for the arrival of the 12th Imam, the owner of the age, as we call him, because the owner of the age is the symbol of the justice and brotherly love prevailing around the world. When the Imam arrives, all of these problems will be resolved. And a prayer for the owner of the age is nothing but a wish for justice and brotherly love to prevail around the world age. It's roughly the same as the relationship which exists between Christians and the Christ.
So the ideology of Iran and the Muslim world is that a Messiah called the 12th Imam, or Al-Mahdi, is coming back really soon. What you do not know is this: that violence on the earth must precede the coming of the 12th Imam. And this is why you have seen beheadings done by Islamic jihadists. It's why you have seen unbelievable bombings by Islam. You've seen people run over with cars or trucks in the name of Allah. You've seen mass shootings brought about by Islamic jihadists. A jihadist is a wager of a holy war against the infidel, which is anyone who does not worship Allah. So, with all of this pent-up hatred toward the great Satan, that's Trump in the United States, and the Western world, there is the underlying absolute hatred of all Jews and of Israel in particular. Let's read what Ahmadinejad has to say about eliminating Israel. It's the same thing as their supreme leader has said, and I've already quoted that. You've seen it. But let me post this and I'll read it to you. It says, from Ahmadinejad, date September 24th, 2012. Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad on Monday disregarded a United Nations warning to avoid incendiary, say that twice, rhetoric, and declared ahead of the annual General Assembly session that Israel has no roots in the Middle East and would be eliminated. The UN said, look, I don't want you to say that, but he ended up saying it. Further, I'm reading, in remarks to reporters in New York, he also said he does not take seriously the threat that Israel could launch a military strike against Iran's nuclear facilities, but they will. He denied sending arms into Syria and called economic conditions in his sanctions-hit country, it's not really as bad as they're portrayed. We know better. When this guy's lips are moving, he's lying. He also goes on to say Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has hinted that Israel would strike Iran's nuclear sites and has criticized U.S. President Barack Obama's position at the time when he made this speech in 2012. He criticized Obama's position that sanctions and diplomacy should be given more time to stop Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons. Iran denies that it is seeking nuclear arms. Again, read his lips, he's lying. And says its atomic work is just peaceful. It's aimed at generating electricity. We know better. In 2005, Ahmadinejad called Israel a tumor and echoed the words of the former Iranian Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, by saying that Israel should be wiped off the map. This is what the sentiment is in all of Iran, whatever the leader is. In case you still don't believe it, unless you hear it, here is the former Iranian president's own words in a video. Again, he denies ever having said the words "death to Israel." But watch this.
اعلام میکنم این رژیم منحوس پرچم شیطان است، پرچم شیطان بزرگ است و صرفاً مجری دستورات آمریکا و انگلیس جنایتکار است. اونها تصور میکنند که ملت‌های 100 سال قبلند، غافل از اینکه شرایط دنیا عوض شده است. امروز همه ملت‌ها بیدارند و ملت ایران پرچمدار بیداری همه ملت هاست. ما ببینیم از جنوبی ترین نقطه آمریکای جنوبی تا شرقی ترین نقطه آسیا همه ملت ها یک فریاد میزنند و همه اونها با پلاکارد و مشت‌های گره کرده فریاد میزنند مرگ بر اسرائیل.
You have to ask yourself, right, where did all this hate originate and when? A lot of people think it originated in your lifetime, in the past 50 years maybe. Some think it just started between Arabs and Jews, again, within our lifetime, or maybe since, Trump got in office. If you think that, you would be wrong. It actually all started, this hatred started way back in the Old Testament days when Abraham, the father of both Jews and Arabs, was promised a son by God. Abraham was about 85 years of age at the time that God promised him and his wife Sarah that they would have a son. So what happened was Abraham and Sarah failed to trust God and God's word and his promise. So Sarah suggested that Abraham, close your ears, have sex with her handmaiden, who was an Arab or Egyptian by the name of Hagar. Hagar, the Arab woman, conceived a son, and his name was Ishmael. This is all Old Testament stuff. After some time had passed, Hagar used to flaunt her son in front of Sarah. Well, how would you feel? Sarah became incensed and told Abraham to toss her and her Arab son out in the desert. And Abraham obeyed rather than, get into a fight with his wife. So he cast Hagar and Ishmael out into the wilderness. 13 years later, Abraham had his and Sarah's firstborn, and God told him to name that son Isaac, 13 years after Ishmael was born. So let's now read from the Old Testament why Arabs and Jews hate each other and why there will always be this hatred or enmity between them. It comes from an excerpt that I wrote from one of my many articles that I've written on faithwriters.com. If you want to go there and just type in John Tyler author and you'll see them all. But that article was entitled Why Arabs and Jews Hate Each Other. It's taken from Genesis 21:14, and I'll read it. And Abraham rose up early in the morning, and he took bread and a bottle of water and gave it unto Hagar. That's the slave Arab woman, putting it on her shoulder and the child, and sent her away, and she departed into the wilderness of Beersheba. And in Genesis chapter 16, verse 12, it says this: This son of yours, Ishmael, will be a wild man, as untamed as a wild donkey. He will raise his fist against everyone and will be against him. Everyone will be against him. He will live in open hostility to relatives. This is why Arabs and Jews will always be at war. So the bottom line is this, that Iran is the Arab catalyst about to get ready for a cataclysmic event in the Middle East, which is the nuclear catalyst. Trump has set the match. He ignited the flame in Iran. Iran is now more hostile than ever before, and the threat to wipe Israel off the map is now imminent. Prior to now, Iran really had no nuclear bombs, meaning prior to, say, in 2005. They didn't have this stuff. This generation, 2005. Iran's leaders called for the total destruction of Israel. All their leaders, from Ahmadinejad to the Ayatollahs. So how can they destroy Israel? Well, they've lost every war that they've started or came against Israel with other Arab countries. And the war in 1967 was called the Six-Day War because Israel actually defeated all of the Arab countries that came against them with tanks and planes, you name it. And the battle was over in a mere 6 days. God just showed them, I can do this in 6 days without anybody's help. So Israel took ownership of both East and West Jerusalem at the end of that 6-day war, because they won the war with the Arabs. Before that, they didn't own both sides of Jerusalem. So Israel also took possession of lands where the Palestinians now live. That ticks off the Arab world as well. However, to keep some semblance of peace, what Israel did in the 1967 war is they agreed to let the Arabs control the top of sacred Mount Zion in Jerusalem. That's where the first Holy Temple and the second Holy Temple were built. The Arabs have control of what is called the Dome of the Rock and the third holiest shrine of all Islam, which is called the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and that is located up on top of Mount Zion in Jerusalem. Israel intends to build a new temple atop Mount Zion. and it happens to conflict with the location of the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque. So now what's going to happen? Let me post this photo for you and you'll see. There it is. The place where that blue line is seen is where Israel plans to build their new holy temple. And I'm going to cover how everything that is needed, including the holy altar and all the other artifacts and replacements of artifacts that are already done. And the temple architecture is done, and the design is done, and there's already a model already built. And I'm going to show you that model in the next podcast called The Israeli Connection. So Israel also intends to perform a preemptive strike against Iran's nuclear facilities. Why? Because Iran keeps threatening to wipe them off the face of the earth. They're going to do it as soon as Israeli intelligence determines that Iran has concluded building one nuclear device. When is that going to happen? I would suggest soon. So the stage is set on the Iranian side of the equation. They are determined to wipe Israel off the face of the map, and they are now completing their nuclear bomb making material. So this is what's going to happen. They need to show their dominance throughout the Middle East and the Arab world. In order to do that, they must be the ones to destroy Israel. They figure that will bring them street cred, if you will. So you have not heard of any other Arab country planning to eliminate Israel or wipe them off the map. So Iran is the source of that conflict that will bring the end of days very soon. How soon? Glad you asked. When you see the very first shovelful of dirt coming off Mount Zion, when Israel is going to start the building of that holy temple, then I'm going to say this. You have 3.5 years to get your things in order concerning God and your salvation. And I'll detail how that will come about in my next podcast, The Israeli Connection. So stay tuned, and thanks for staying with me on the first podcast.